Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me where and what time you're watching? Thanks. Jordan had always been captivated by the city, its endless pulse, the dance of light and shadow, and the raw, untold stories tucked away in its corners. As a freelance photographer, he had a knack for capturing moments others overlooked. The weary glance of a commuter, neon streaks shimmering in puddles, or the intricate graffiti scrawled in forgotten alleyways. His current project aimed to showcase the soul of urban life. But over the past week, that soul seemed to be slipping away. It started subtly. Streets that normally buzzed with life well past midnight were now deserted by sundown. Daytime crowds thinned unnaturally, and shop windows that once advertised open 24/7 displayed hastily scrawled closed until further notice signs. Military helicopters skimmed low over rooftops, slicing through the silence, while local news channels announced curfews without explanation. Jordan dismissed it as government overreach, perhaps a drill or some political stunt. Yet the air felt heavier, charged with an unshakable tension. That evening, Jordan sat at his desk, editing a series of waterfront photos. The faint hum of his laptop filled the room, punctuated by the occasional clink of ice in his whiskey glass. For an hour, he'd been nursing the same drink, his attention drifting between the screen and the cityscape beyond his window. The sunset painted the buildings in fiery hues, but something about the view felt off. No car horns, no laughter from the streets. Just the faint, distant wail of sirens. Suddenly, his phone buzzed violently on the desk, jolting him from his thoughts. The screen lit up with an emergency alert, zombies, full city lockdown in effect. Stay indoors, trust no one. Jordan stared at the message, his brow furrowing. Zombies? It had to be a joke or a hack. He chuckled nervously, shaking his head as he took another sip of whiskey. Real funny, he muttered, tossing the phone onto the couch. Yet the uneasy silence outside lingered, gnawing at his skepticism. His curiosity got the better of him, and he picked up the phone again to check social media. His feed was chaos, a torrent of shaky videos showing people running, screaming, and barricading doors. Photos of bloodied streets and clips of military vehicles racing through neighborhoods filled the screen. One video showed a man clawing at a window, his face grotesquely twisted, while another captured the shadowy silhouette of a barricade exploding under heavy fire. Faint gunfire crackled through the speakers as Jordan scrolled. A deep, resonating crash from outside made him jump. He froze, listening. The sound came again, louder this time, like metal being ripped apart. His heart pounded as he inched toward the window, but hesitated. His gut screamed at him to stay away. Whatever was out there wasn't something he wanted to face. Not yet. His hands shook as he set his glass down and moved to turn off the lights, instinctively crouching below the window frame. The city that had once inspired him now felt like a trap. Jordan sank back into his chair, the laptop casting a faint glow in the dark room. The air was unnaturally still, broken only by the hum of the fridge. The crash outside was impossible to ignore, but the silence that followed was worse. Jordan drummed his fingers against the table, his gaze darting between his camera and the window. Finally, his curiosity won. Sliding his chair back with a soft scrape, he crept to the window and nudged the blinds aside with trembling fingers. The street below was deserted, its usual rhythm replaced by an eerie calm. Jordan grabbed his DSLR from the desk and turned it on. The faint whir of the lens extending seemed unnaturally loud. Crouching low, he angled the camera toward the street. Through the viewfinder, the empty sidewalks and scattered newspapers came into sharp focus. Fluttering lazily against a bench and a row of cars parked haphazardly at odd angles. It was clear something had happened here, but there were no immediate signs of life or explanations. Then, a sudden movement caught Jordan's attention. A man stumbled into view from behind a parked van, his posture hunched and unsteady. Jordan adjusted the zoom on his camera, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The man's shirt was soaked in something dark. Blood, Jordan realized with a jolt. His steps were uneven and he clutched his side as if in pain. He glanced over his shoulder repeatedly, his eyes wide with fear, as though expecting someone or something to appear. Through the lens, Jordan tracked the man's movements, leaning in closer. Then from the shadows of a nearby alley, 3 figures emerged. Their pace quickened, their focus locked onto the man. They didn't shout or call out. They simply moved with unsettling intent. The man turned, saw them, and broke into a desperate, stumbling run. Jordan's grip on the camera tightened as he followed the unfolding scene. The figures caught up with alarming speed, tackling the man to the ground. Jordan's heart pounded as he watched through the lens. They piled onto him, clawing at his arms with frantic aggression. The man thrashed and kicked, his resistance growing weaker with every second. Instinctively, Jordan lowered the camera, his hands trembling. He didn't want to see what was happening, but the muffled cries of the man drew his gaze back to the window. The figures dragged the man into the shadows of the alley, their shapes dissolving into the darkness. Jordan blinked, his breath shaky. He wanted to convince himself he'd imagined it, that his mind was playing tricks on him. But before he could fully process what he'd seen, the man stepped back into the light. Adjusting the zoom, Jordan stared through the lens, his mind struggling to catch up. Something was wrong. The man's movements were stiff and unnatural, his head tilted slightly to one side. His arms hung limply at his sides, and his face, once twisted in pain and fear, was now eerily blank. Jordan let the camera fall to his lap, his eyes fixed on the window. The street below was still again, but only for a moment. A distant explosion suddenly shook the building, rattling the windows in their frames. Instinctively, Jordan ducked, the camera clattering to the floor. He pressed his palms against the cold hardwood, staying low as the echo of the explosion rumbled through the city like distant thunder. When the noise faded, the silence that followed felt even heavier. Jordan crouched there for a moment, his thoughts racing. He needed to move. Sitting here wouldn't solve anything. Crawling across the floor to his closet, he opened the door just enough to grab the baseball bat leaning inside. The smooth, solid wood felt like a small comfort in the face of growing uncertainty. From the kitchen, he grabbed a survival kit, just a flashlight, a lighter, and a canister of pepper spray he'd never had to use. He tucked the kit into his jacket pocket and swung the bat over his shoulder. Its weight was both reassuring and foreboding. Standing in the dimly lit apartment, Jordan took a deep breath. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he couldn't stay here. After double-checking the lock on his door, he glanced back toward the window. Whatever was happening outside wasn't random. Something was seriously wrong with the city. He stepped into the stairwell, his heart pounding. The building was unnervingly quiet, the only sound the faint hum of emergency lights overhead. Jordan didn't know what to expect, but staying put wasn't an option. As his footsteps echoed down the dimly lit staircase, he reached the landing. A soft, trembling voice stopped him in his tracks. "Jordan?" He spun around quickly, raising the bat instinctively. In the shadows stood Mrs. Dev, the elderly woman from his floor. She was clutching a pistol in her trembling hands, her wide eyes locked onto his. "Mrs. Dev, what's going on?" Jordan asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. She stepped closer, her breath shaky. "They're everywhere," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They've locked us in. The doors, they're all shut tight. I tried to leave, but..." Mrs. Dev's voice trailed off as her gaze darted nervously behind her. Jordan followed her glance up the stairs, the eerie stillness of the building tightening in his chest. "Who's locked us in?" he asked, his voice low and tense. Before she could answer, a strange sound echoed from above. It didn't belong. Somewhere between a screech and the rush of something large moving fast. Jordan stiffened, his eyes scanning the shadows above. Mrs. Dev grabbed his arm suddenly, her grip surprisingly strong for her frail frame. "Don't move when it's dark," she whispered, barely audible. "No matter what happens, don't move." Jordan opened his mouth to ask what she meant, but a sharp, piercing screech cut through the air, louder this time and clearly from the floor above. Mrs. Dev reacted instantly, shoving him toward the stairwell door with startling urgency. "Run!" she hissed, her voice trembling with panic. Before Jordan could process her words, a figure dropped down from above, landing with a sickening thud in front of them. The creature lunged at Mrs. Dev, and within moments they were on the floor, struggling violently. The sounds were horrifying, the tearing, thrashing, and guttural growls that filled the stairwell. Jordan stood frozen, paralyzed by disbelief and terror, as the creature clawed at her with frantic, erratic movements. The struggle was over almost as quickly as it began. Mrs. Dev's body went still, motionless on the cold floor. Jordan didn't wait to see more. His legs moved on instinct, propelling him up the stairs as fast as they could go. His bat clutched tightly in his hand. He sprinted, each step echoing loudly in the suffocating silence. The building felt endless, the stairwell stretching on forever. When he finally reached his apartment, he slammed the door shut behind him, fumbling with the locks until they were secured. His heart thundered in his chest and his breath came in short, ragged gasps. Pressing his back against the door, he tried to steady himself, but the silence was oppressive, doing nothing to calm his racing mind. Just as he began to think he was safe, a faint scratching noise came from the window. His head snapped toward it, dread pooling in his stomach. Mrs. Dev was there. She stood outside, staring in at him, her face pressed against the glass. Her eyes were cold, vacant, and unnervingly still. Something about her was off, terribly off. Her expression lacked emotion, and she didn't blink or move. Instead, her hands dragged slowly, almost lazily, against the window, the faint scraping sound sending chills down Jordan's spine. For a moment, he couldn't move. His eyes locked onto hers. He could hear her breathing faintly through the glass, shallow and labored, as if it took effort. He forced himself to take a deep breath, his nerves on edge. The apartment was no longer safe. Whatever chaos was spreading through the city had reached every corner of the building. Hiding here wasn't an option. Jordan grabbed his bag, slinging it over his shoulder. With the bat in hand, he moved cautiously to the door. The hallway was eerily silent, the oppressive kind of quiet that made his skin crawl. He walked quickly, each muffled step on the carpet feeling too loud. His heart raced with every movement. The main entrance was just ahead. Maybe he could make it. Maybe this nightmare could finally end. But when he reached the lobby, he froze. The heavy glass doors, usually a welcoming exit, were sealed shut. Thick chains wrapped tightly around the handles, secured with massive locks. A crude note was taped to the glass, the bold, erratic handwriting stark against the chaos outside. "For your safety, do not attempt to leave." Jordan stared at the note, his mind struggling to process the words. "For your safety." The phrase echoed in his head, nonsensical and maddening. The city was crumbling, and yet someone was still intent on keeping him trapped. His eyes flicked to the chains. They weren't just a precaution, they were a barricade. Desperation gripped him as he considered his options. He could try to break through, but the locks were solid, unyielding. A sudden sound made him freeze. The sharp clinking of metal. Something was scraping against the glass. He turned slowly, dread rising like a tide in his chest. Jordan turned toward the sound, his blood running cold. Through the dim emergency lights, he saw them. Figures in the distance pounding against the glass doors. Their faces were pale and drawn, their eyes glowing faintly in the flickering light. The rhythmic pounding of their fists on the glass formed a sickening, almost hypnotic beat. Jordan's stomach churned, but he couldn't move, not yet. He watched as the infected pressed closer, slamming against the doors with desperate open mouths. The glass shuddered under the force, small cracks spidering out from the point of impact. His mind raced, but his body was frozen. He needed to move. He couldn't let them get through. His eyes darted around the lobby, searching for an escape. Then he saw it, the back door to the parking garage. If he could just reach it, maybe he'd make it to his car and get out of this nightmare. One last glance at the growing crowd of infected, and Jordan turned and ran. His feet pounded against the tiled floor as he sprinted down the hallway, His heart thundered in his chest, and every step felt like a step closer to freedom. But the noise behind him, the pounding fists, the primal hunger in their eyes, drove him faster. He reached the garage door, shoving it open as a rush of cool air hit him. Relief flooded his senses, but it was fleeting. The garage was dark, illuminated only by flickering overhead lights. Jordan's car was parked in its usual spot. He moved quickly, his eyes scanning the shadows as he crossed the concrete floor. The echo of his footsteps seemed too loud, bouncing off the walls and making him feel exposed. A prickling sensation ran down his spine, like he was being watched. He reached the car, yanked open the door, and slid inside. His hands gripped the steering wheel, trembling but determined. He didn't waste a second, starting the engine with a comforting rumble. As he shifted into drive, a deafening crash came from the garage entrance. Jordan's head snapped toward the sound, his blood freezing. Shadows darted into view, fast and chaotic. The infected had made it inside. Panic surged through him. He tightened his grip on the wheel and slammed his foot on the gas. The car lurched forward, headlights cutting through the darkness, but the shadows were everywhere. The infected were too close, their guttural sounds growing louder. Then a voice pierced through the chaos. "Hey, you there!" Jordan's eyes darted to the right, heart hammering. A figure stood near the far wall of the garage, silhouetted against the dim emergency lights. For a split second he thought it was another infected, but then he noticed her movement. Quick, purposeful, deliberate. He slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against the concrete. The woman stopped just in front of the car, panting, her eyes wide and sharp. She wasn't alone. A man appeared behind her, holding a crowbar in one hand and a large bag in the other. The woman had a tire iron slung over her shoulder, and her intense gaze locked onto Jordan, making him hesitate. "Get out of the car," she shouted, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We need to talk." Jordan froze, unsure if he should trust them. Trust was a luxury in this world, one he couldn't afford easily. He glanced in the rearview mirror, checking for movement. The infected seemed to have fallen silent for now. The garage felt unnervingly still. Slowly he opened the car door and stepped out, his guard up. "Who are you?" he asked, voice guarded but edged with hope. "I'm Kira," she said quickly, motioning to the man behind her. "And this is Luis." Luis gave a short nod, his face set in a grim expression. Jordan took a cautious step forward. "I thought I was the only one left in this building," he said, breathless from the sprint and the fear. "We're not the only ones," Luis replied, his voice low and gravelly. Kira sighed, still staring out the window, her fingers gripping the tire iron resting on her lap. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice soft but heavy with exhaustion. "Whatever caused this, it's too big for us to fix. Maybe someone out there is working on it, but right now, survival's all that matters." Jordan tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening. "Survival," he echoed bitterly. Luis didn't survive. Kira flinched but didn't look away from the window. He knew what he was doing. He gave us a chance. The SUV rumbled over cracked pavement as they drove deeper into the city. The headlights illuminated overturned cars, shattered glass, and abandoned buildings. The occasional flicker of movement in the shadows reminded them they weren't alone, but the infected seemed to keep their distance, at least for now. Jordan glanced at Kira again. "Do you think there's anywhere safe? A shelter, a military base, something?" She finally turned to look at him, her face lined with fatigue and something else. Hope, or maybe desperation. "I heard rumors before everything went dark. Some kind of quarantine zone near the outskirts of the city, but who knows if it's still there, or if it's safe." Jordan nodded slowly. "It's better than nothing. We can't just keep running without a destination." Kira hesitated, then nodded in agreement. "Fine, we'll head there. But we need more than just supplies. We need a plan. We can't afford mistakes like that again." Jordan's mind flashed back to the convenience store, to the moment Luis slammed the door shut behind them. The memory felt like a knot tightening in his chest. "Agreed," he said quietly. The silence returned, stretching between them as the SUV rumbled on. The city's skyline loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. Eventually, Kira spoke again, her voice almost too soft to hear over the engine. "Do you have anyone out there? Family? Friends?" Jordan hesitated, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Not anymore," he admitted. "What about you?" Kira's gaze dropped to the tire iron in her lap. "Not anymore," she echoed. They drove on, the weight of their shared losses filling the air. As they approached a wide intersection, Jordan slowed the SUV, his eyes scanning for any sign of movement. The road ahead seemed clear, but a faint noise caught his attention. A low hum, mechanical and rhythmic, coming from the direction of an old factory. Kira straightened in her seat. "You hear that?" Jordan nodded, pulling the SUV to a stop. "What do you think it is?" She shrugged but reached for her backpack, pulling out a flashlight. "Could be anything, or anyone." Jordan turned off the engine, and the sudden silence felt deafening. "We should check it out. If it's people, they might have information, or more supplies." Kira hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but we're in and out, no risks." Together they stepped out of the SUV, weapons in hand, and moved cautiously toward the sound. The hum grew louder as they approached the factory, its massive rusted doors standing ajar. A faint light flickered inside, casting eerie shadows against the walls. Jordan glanced at Kira, who gave a slight nod. He pushed the door open wider, the metal creaking loudly in the stillness. The hum was almost deafening now, and as they stepped inside, they saw the source. A massive generator, its blinking lights and steady rumble an unexpected sight in the chaos of the city. But what caught their attention wasn't the generator. It was the group of people standing near it, armed, tense, and staring straight at them. "Who are you?" one of them demanded. One of them, stepping forward with a rifle slung across his chest. Jordan raised his hand slowly, glancing at Kira. "We're just looking for safety," he said. The man narrowed his eyes. "Safety doesn't exist anymore." She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "I don't think so. Not now, at least." She leaned back in her seat, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "I mean, I don't know what it is or where it came from, but the world won't ever be the same after this. It's already too far gone." Jordan mulled over her words, unwilling to believe them. He didn't want to accept that everything they knew, everything they had lived through, could just unravel like this. But Kira's tone was resolute, and deep down, he knew she was right. When they finally reached the subway station, the place was eerily silent. There were no signs of life, no one to tell them they were making a mistake or warn them to turn back. The world had gone quiet, and it felt like the end of everything. Jordan parked the SUV and climbed out, the cold air biting at his face. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself, his breath forming visible clouds in the dim glow of the street lamp. Kira followed silently. Neither spoke as they approached the station. Inside, the air was heavy with dust, and the remnants of whatever tragedy had struck were impossible to ignore. Bloodstains marred the floor, and torn, abandoned clothing lay scattered about. The place felt deserted, yet the stillness carried an unnerving weight, as if the station had been abandoned in a rush. "Looks like we're not the first ones here," Jordan murmured, eyeing the bloodstains leading deeper into the station. Kira nodded, her sharp gaze scanning the area. "No kidding. This place is a mess. Someone either made a stand here or just tried to survive." They moved further into the station. Each step echoed off the walls, amplifying the uneasy quiet. They came to a door, its hinges groaning as they forced it open. Beyond lay the makeshift lab they had been searching for. A chaotic space littered with scattered papers, broken equipment, and cryptic markings on the walls. The air was thick with a metallic, faintly sour smell. Kira approached the desk, her fingers brushing over the disarrayed papers. "These aren't from a normal lab," she murmured. "These are government documents." Jordan stepped closer, peering over her shoulder. The writing on the papers was difficult to decipher, but the sense of something catastrophic was clear. Kira's face tightened as she flipped through the pages. Her expression shifted to one of shock as the realization hit her. "Whatever this virus is, it wasn't supposed to do this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "They were trying to create something stronger, more resilient." Jordan frowned, not understanding. "Stronger? What do you mean?" She looked up at him, her eyes weary. "They were experimenting, trying to make people stronger, resistant to pain. They pushed aggression to the extreme, but it failed and it spread. The virus, I mean." A cold knot formed in Jordan's stomach. They had been running from the chaos, from the infected, but now he understood the true horror. These weren't mindless monsters. They were victims, casualties of something much larger, something they hadn't chosen. "We need to learn more," Jordan said quietly, his voice barely audible. "If this virus is out there, we need to understand it. Maybe we can do something." Kira shook her head slowly, her gaze distant. "I don't think there's anything left to do. Whatever happened, it's done. Now it's just about surviving." Jordan didn't reply. He took a step back, his eyes sweeping the dimly lit lab. The walls were covered in frantic notes, some barely legible, others faded with time. Every scribble pointed to the same grim conclusion. They were too late. They lingered in the lab for a while, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. With the documents in hand, they moved on, knowing they wouldn't find any answers here. They were still in the dark, surviving one day, 1 hour, 1 moment at a time. Jordan had barely stepped through the doorway when he heard the heavy storage door click shut behind him. Confused, he turned just in time to see Kira's hand twist the lock into place. She stood there, an almost apologetic smile on her face, but her eyes held something he'd never seen before. Something cold, calculating. "Kira," Jordan said, his voice trembling, "what are you doing?" She didn't answer immediately, but the corners of her lips curled up slightly. "I'm sorry, Jordan, but I can't let you slow me down." His stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" "You," she interrupted, her voice low. "I'm infected. I was bitten back at the store. I thought I could control it, but I can feel it happening. It won't be long now." Jordan's heart sank as the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. "No, you can't." "I'm not going to make it." She cut him off again, her voice hard. "But you can still get out. You can survive. I just need to make it to the surface. If I can get there, maybe there's a chance. Maybe someone will help me." "Help you?" Jordan's mind raced. The thought of leaving her behind, of letting her go, felt like a betrayal. But what choice did he have? She was already slipping away, changing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "I'm sorry," Kira whispered one last time as she turned to walk toward the exit. "You'll be fine. I'll be fine. Just get out of here. Don't look back." Before he could respond, Kira turned sharply. Her eyes, now eerily vacant, locked onto him. The smile had vanished, replaced by the unmistakable hunger of the infected. Jordan rushed to the door, banging on it, shouting her name, but her footsteps grew fainter. Then everything went quiet. Panic gripped him, and he slammed his fists against the door, desperate to force it open. The lock held firm, but his desperation fueled him. After what felt like an eternity, the door cracked enough for him to slip through, and he bolted into the hall. He had no idea where Kira had gone, but he couldn't leave things like this. He had to find her. As he rounded a corner, his breath caught in his throat. Kira stood at the far end of the hallway, her back to him. Her body was still, but her head turned slowly, her eyes locking onto his. There was no recognition in them, just the vacant stare of the infected. Jordan's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to run, to escape, but something held him there, a sense of duty, of responsibility to the person Kira had once been. But that woman was gone now. replaced by something far more dangerous. "Kira," he whispered, his voice shaking. The figure didn't respond. Instead, she lunged, faster than he could react. Her mouth snapped open, revealing those blood-stained teeth. Before he could dodge, her hands were on him, tearing at his jacket. A surge of adrenaline coursed through him as he shoved her away, stumbling backward. In the chaos, Jordan's mind fixated on one thought. He had to survive. He couldn't let the infection spread, couldn't let Kira become just another monster in this nightmare. With a final, heartbreaking scream, he swung the blunt end of his survival bat with everything he had. The impact rang through the empty station, and Kira crumpled to the floor, her body twitching as the infection took its final hold. Jordan stood over her, breath coming in short, ragged gasps. His hands shook as the weight of what he'd just done sank in. But there was no time to mourn. He couldn't afford to. The station was still dangerous, and the world outside was even worse. He turned his back and walked away, his heart heavy with guilt, but his resolve stronger than ever. He had to keep moving. Jordan stumbled out of the subway station, his legs weak and trembling from hours of fear and tension. The air was thick with the stench of decay, but there was something else, something metallic, cold, and unnatural. His heart raced as he shielded his eyes from the blinding sunlight, adjusting to the world above ground for the first time in what felt like forever. The city, once alive with the hum of daily life, now felt eerie, dead, and unrecognizable. The streets, typically bustling with people and traffic, were silent, too silent. Not a single car moved, not a single. The only sounds were the faint hum of drones soaring overhead. Jordan's breath caught in his throat, and he forced himself to take a few steps forward, squinting into the distance, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Across the skyline, massive steel walls stretched far and wide, towering high enough to block out the city beyond. The barricades were covered in flashing red warning signs, their metallic surfaces gleaming under the harsh sunlight. It felt as though the city had been placed inside a cage. His pulse quickened. This couldn't be real. This had to be some mistake. There had to be a way out. He couldn't be trapped here with nowhere to go. Above, the drones buzzed like angry bees, their metal bodies cutting through the air with precision. They circled, patrolling the perimeter of the walls, their cameras scanning the streets for any sign of movement. Then he heard it. A loudspeaker crackled to life, its mechanical voice cutting through the silence. Containment in progress. Do not approach the walls. All civilians are required to stay in designated areas. Violators will be removed. The words echoed in Jordan's ears, sending a chill down his spine. He could barely process it. This couldn't be happening. This was supposed to be temporary, right? A quarantine for a few days, maybe a week. But this was different. The message wasn't just a warning. It was a decree. His mind raced, but there was no time to think. The automated announcement repeated, this time with more urgency. Containment in progress. Do not approach the walls. All civilians are required to stay in designated areas. Violators will be removed. Jordan's thoughts spiraled as he grasped the full scope of the situation. The government wasn't just containing the outbreak. They were abandoning the city. The emergency alerts, curfews, and lockdowns were all part of a calculated effort to contain the infection, to keep the truth from getting out. He was nothing more than a pawn in their game. The city, the people, they were expendable. His chest tightened as the realization set in. The infected weren't the only threat. The walls, the drones, the messages, they were all part of a plan to keep the world from learning the truth about what was happening here. A cover-up, a containment effort, and they didn't care about anyone left behind. He was just a survivor, but a survivor in an abandoned city, a city left to rot, discarded as the world moved on. As he stood there, 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. The world outside must have moved on. leaving this place to decay and descend into chaos. The infected roamed freely, but the real danger now wasn't the monsters stalking the streets. It was the system that had sealed them in. Jordan glanced back at the city, the towering steel walls, the drones patrolling above, and the blaring automated messages. He was trapped. There was no escape. The nightmare was only beginning. Turning away from the walls, his gaze fell on the abandoned streets, the empty cars, the wreckage of a world that no longer existed. He had no plan, no direction, but one thing was certain. He couldn't stop now. The city had been abandoned, but he couldn't let it claim him too. With nothing left to lose, he set his eyes on the horizon, where the walls stretched endlessly into the distance, and began to walk, hoping for a miracle that would never come. Jordan walked away from the towering walls, the weight of everything he'd witnessed pressing down on him with every step. The city behind him, once full of life, now felt like an unreachable memory. The streets were littered with signs of chaos, burned-out cars, shattered windows, and the remnants of a world that had collapsed. He moved with purpose but no real direction, as though his legs knew the path better than his mind could comprehend. Each footstep echoed through the silence, broken only by the occasional distant growl of the infected lurking nearby. But the thought of giving up never crossed his mind. Not yet. He couldn't let this be the end. Not after. The only sounds were the faint hum of drones soaring overhead. Jordan's breath caught in his throat, and he forced himself to take a few steps forward, squinting into the distance, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Across the skyline, massive steel walls stretched far and wide, towering high enough to block out the city beyond. The barricades were covered in flashing red warning signs, their metallic surfaces gleaming under the harsh sunlight. It felt as though the city had been placed inside a cage. His pulse quickened. This couldn't be real. This had to be some mistake. There had to be a way out. He couldn't be trapped here with nowhere to go. Above, the drones buzzed like angry bees, their metal bodies cutting through the air with precision. They circled, patrolling the perimeter of the walls, their cameras scanning the streets for any sign of movement. Then, he heard it. A loudspeaker crackled to life, its mechanical voice cutting through the silence. Containment in progress. Do not approach the walls. All civilians are required to stay in designated areas. Violators will be removed. The words echoed in Jordan's ears, sending a chill down his spine. He could barely process it. This couldn't be happening. This was supposed to be temporary, right? A quarantine for a few days, maybe a week. But this was different. The message wasn't just a warning, it was a decree. His mind raced, but there was no time to think. The automated announcement repeated, this time with more urgency. Containment in progress. Do not approach the walls. All civilians are required to stay in designated areas. Violators will be removed. Jordan's thoughts spiraled as he grasped the full scope of the situation. The government wasn't just containing the outbreak. They were abandoning the city. The emergency alerts, curfews, and lockdowns were all part of a calculated effort to contain the infection, to keep the truth from getting out. He was nothing more than a pawn in their game. The city, the people, they were expendable. His chest tightened as the realization set in. The infected weren't the only threat. The walls, the drones, the messages, they were all part of a plan to keep the world from learning the truth about what was happening here. A cover-up, a containment effort, and they didn't care about anyone left behind. He was just a survivor, but a survivor in an abandoned city, a city left to rot, discarded as the world moved on. As he stood there, 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. The world outside must have moved on, leaving this place to decay and descend into chaos. The infected roamed freely, but the real danger now wasn't the monsters stalking the streets. It was the system that had sealed them in. Jordan glanced back at the city, the towering steel walls, the drones patrolling above, and the blaring automated messages. He was trapped. There was no escape. The nightmare was only beginning. Turning away from the walls, his gaze fell on the abandoned streets, the empty cars, the wreckage of a world that no longer existed. He had no plan, no direction, but one thing was certain. He couldn't stop now. The city had been abandoned, but he couldn't let it claim him too. With nothing left to lose, he set his eyes on the horizon, where the walls stretched endlessly into the distance, and began to walk, hoping for a miracle that would never come. Jordan walked away from the towering walls, the weight of everything he'd witnessed pressing down on him with every step. The city behind him, once full of life, now felt like an unreachable memory. The streets were littered with signs of chaos, burned-out cars, shattered windows, and the remnants of a world that had collapsed. He moved with purpose but no real direction, as though his legs knew the path better than his mind could comprehend. Each footstep echoed through the silence, broken only by the occasional distant growl of the infected lurking nearby. But the thought of giving up never crossed his mind. Not yet. He couldn't let this be the end. Not after. Everything felt heavy on Jordan, his camera still slung over his shoulder. It had captured the horrors, yes, but it had also captured the truth. And the truth was something the world needed to see. He paused in front of an old, crumbling building, its windows long boarded up. There was a quiet desperation in his movements as he set up his camera once again. He connected the wires to his DSLR, adjusting the lens, preparing to capture one last moment. He had no laptop, no live streaming software, but he had his camera. It was all he needed. Jordan raised it to his eye and began recording, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of everything he'd witnessed. "This is Jordan, freelance photographer. I've been recording everything that happened. The government's cover-up, the virus, the military's actions, the lies. They've sealed us in. No one's coming to help, but I'm still here. And if you're watching this, if anyone's watching, there's still time. Don't let them forget us." His words hung in the air for a moment, and then he turned the camera toward the horizon, capturing the walls looming beyond him, the last barrier between him and the outside world. The city sprawled beneath him, a wasteland of broken dreams. As the camera clicked, he took his final picture. The infected were closing in, their groans rising from the streets below. Jordan could hear them, their twisted hunger growing louder with every passing second. But there was nothing left to fear. He had done what he could. The truth was out there. He stepped back, setting his camera's timer for the final shot. As the click of the shutter echoed into the stillness, he knew this would be his last picture. The infected were too close now, their figures emerging from the shadows. Yet for a brief moment, Jordan felt peace. The picture would live on. The world would know the truth, and maybe, just maybe, someone would come to finish what he had started. As the growls of the infected grew louder, Jordan turned toward them, no longer running, no longer afraid. The lens snapped once more. Months passed. The world outside began slowly piecing together the chaos. The footage Jordan had captured, along with the photographs he left behind, surfaced through underground channels. The world's media picked up his final broadcast, showing the government's cover-up, the viral outbreak, and the truth that had been buried. It wasn't long before the authorities could no longer deny it. Jordan had exposed their lies. The footage spread like wildfire, sparking an outcry that crossed borders. Scientists and researchers, intrigued by the footage of the infected and the virus's rapid spread, used Jordan's findings to begin formulating a cure. The footage revealed key details of the virus's mutation and its aggressive nature, leading to breakthroughs in the development of a vaccine. In the months that followed, military forces from other countries intervened, sending in humanitarian aid and securing the perimeter of the quarantined cities. The survivors, those who had managed to hold out, were rescued and brought to safe zones. A vaccine was developed and the infection was finally brought under control. The world would never be the same, but the nightmare was over. Jordan's name became a symbol of resistance, his final image a reminder of the man who refused to let the truth die. The camera he left behind, his final testament, saved countless lives. And though Jordan never saw the world rebuild, his actions ensured the infection would never spread beyond the walls. The world had found his camera, and through it, hope was born. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more creepy stories. Stay safe, and see you in the next nightmare.